I think DAOs are important because they're the organizing principle of Web3. So Web3 without DAOs is, a disorganized network of, individual actors or agents. If we want to have a future where the internet has, elements that are operated and owned by users, we need some kind of principle that organizes that, around missions or around projects. And I think that's really where DAOs come in.
Hi everyone, it's Jordan from the NEWFORUM team. NEWFORUM is the community podcast that invites purpose-driven leaders, visionaries, creators to spark accessible conversations on the topics of crypto, the metaverse, NFTs, and everything Web3. Today we have as a guest Emily Furlong, co-founder of Otterspace, leader when it comes to badges and verifiable credentials. So we will discuss about her journey in Web3 and the vision of Otterspace. So welcome, Emily, and let's start if you're ready.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
So Emily, how did you get into Web3? What is your story?
This is always an interesting one to answer because you never know, where really was the beginning point. I first read some books about blockchain back in the 2016, 17 kind of that hype cycle, but didn't really get my feet wet at that time. I was kind of more of an outside observer. And then in my last job, I worked at SoundCloud. And over there, I was responsible for creator monetization and creator to fan support. I was a product manager of that. And my team was exploring whether we could issue NFT badges to fans who were early supporters of creators. This was in early 2021, so the NFT craze was just taking off. And truth be told, I never really got interested in the digital art, PFP side of NFTs, but I always was very excited about this idea about earned badges within communities. And I saw the potential for this at SoundCloud, which I didn't get to build that, but I did end up quitting my job last year, and we founded Otterspace about a year ago.
So you really actually, you could argue, took a risk. Like what was the difference between 2016 when you started exploring, reading books about blockchain, and I would say the leap of faith when you left your job? Like what was the trigger? Like you actually saw an acceleration in the tech, you were networking with more people. Like what was the trigger?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember back then I was really interested in a company in Berlin called Ocean Protocol, and I was thinking about applying for a job there. So I definitely saw the potential. But I think back then it felt like a very sort of deep tech and very financial space, which wasn't something that I personally identified with. I was a lot more interested in the sort of, creator economy, cultural, social side of technology. And I think that when the NFT craze started, it really showed me that that could become a mainstream application. This more cultural, social side of the technology could become more mainstream. And so I think that's when I started to maybe see more of a place for myself in the space.
And was it at the same time that you discovered the concept of DAOs? Was it like in early 2017, 18, or was it really more towards 2020, 21 when we saw the emergence of concepts like DAOs?
Yeah, it was really more in 2021 when, I was working within the concepts of community, because SoundCloud, even though it's a creator economy platform, there's really strong communities on SoundCloud. So we were doing a lot of research into communities. I was seeing a lot of fandom communities emerge. Discord was becoming a huge platform. SoundCloud serves Gen Z users. So we were really seeing a lot of Discord usage throughout the pandemic. So I got really interested in, the rise of communities as well. And that's when I learned about DAOs as, a specific type of community / organization within Web3.
Why do you think, or what is your opinion when it comes to DAOs being the future? There's a quote actually on the Twitter of Otterspace, which is the next iteration of the internet will be community owned and operated, where the value is distributed to those who contribute. So DAOs are the foundation of Web3. So would you agree with that statement? What are your thoughts in general when it comes to DAOs? Like, is it really the future of Web3? Is it a main component? Why do you think they're so important?
I think DAOs are important because they're the organizing principle of Web3. So Web3 without DAOs is, a disorganized network of, individual actors or agents, right? So that could be a token holder, it could be an investor, it could be a user of a product, it could be a contributor to a product, it could be If we look at Web2, you have creators, you have consumers, you have marketplaces, you have all these different agents. And I think that without DAOs, Web3 is just this disorganized mess. There's no kind of organizing principle behind it. So I think if we want to have a future where the internet has, elements that are operated and owned by users, we need some kind of principle that organizes that, around missions or around projects. And I think that's really where DAOs come in. So I wouldn't argue that DAOs will necessarily stay in their current form. I think they're early and I think they will evolve. And I think they're an emergent concept. But I think the construct of a decentralized organization that runs these types of projects and contributes to missions, I think that's really key to the future of Web3.
How does this tie into Otterspace? Like you left your previous job to co-found Otterspace. Could you explain what is Otterspace, what is the vision, and how does that link to DAOs?
Yeah, so Otterspace, we're building an app, or we have an app and a protocol. Of course, we're still building it, we're still continuing to develop it, but we do have an app and a protocol that's live out there being used by DAOs. And it allows any organization or any community to leverage the power of badges. And we consider a badge to be a key coordination primitive for DAOs to function well. So that's kind of how our vision connects with DAOs and how we want to support DAOs to reach their full potential. Because we've been seeing a lot of challenges with how DAOs function when they're hyper financialized and they're running purely on an ERC20 token. And we really believe that there needs to be a non-financial token primitive that enables these organizations to run effectively.
So badges would be the kind of on-chain reputation. Is that what you mean when you say it's like non-financial incentive?
I don't often use the word reputation. I find it's a very slippery concept. It's very subjective, so I don't really use that term so much. But I think of it as a tool that communities can use to represent information about someone that cannot be bought and sold. So that's why we call it non-financial. So it can be something like a role, that the fact that you are currently the podcast lead at NEWFORUM, that could be captured in a badge. It could also be an achievement, like the fact that you have completed a course in podcasting, issued by a specific course provider. That could also be a badge. So we think of it as a very flexible sort of basic coordination primitive that captures information on chain that's non-financial and earned rather than bought, really.
So you think it's more achievement would be a better term then? When it comes to badges, they represent the achievements.
Yeah, achievement could be a word that they use. I really just come back to the word badge because, humans have been using badges for centuries, really. All the way back, if you look at, coats of arms, they were visual representations of the groups that you were affiliated with. They also had elements of achievements, like you said, but it could just be group membership that's also communicated through a badge. The Twitter verified checkmark, you could consider that a badge. It's an achievement, but it's also, a signal that you have passed some kind of threshold of popularity. We have, Scout badges are a really common example that we use, where people show their affiliation, but also their achievements and their sort of experiences on on their visual, on their clothing that they then wear to different events. So we think that badges are actually a very sort of human concept that has existed for a long time, and rather than reducing it to it's a skill or it's a reputation or it's an achievement, we're trying to sort of just come back to the concept of badges.
So the badges work, do they work as soulbound tokens? Like, can you exchange the badge? Can you give it to someone? Or how does it work?
Yeah, so the key sort of construct behind badges is that they can't be bought and sold. They're non-tradable. They're, you can call them soul-bound. They are non-transferable. They're also, we use the word account-bound sometimes because we're building on top of a token primitive called account-bound tokens, which is EIP 4973. That we've been contributing to since April. And yeah, we are working on building things into the protocol natively around reassignment and revocation. So these are some core functions that the protocol needs to have in order to function with this new concept of this non-transferable token. So with revocation, what we mean is that the community or the issuer of the token, the organization that issued the token, is able to revoke it in the case where someone abuses their role or they leave their position. that token can be revoked. And we're also going to be building in a system around reassignment. So if you lose access to your wallet or you change, you want to rotate your keys, you can port your collection of badges to a new account. So just because they're described as non-transferable, of course, that doesn't mean that we want badges to be stuck in your account in case you need to rotate your keys or you lose access.
Right, yeah, because there's also kind of a, not necessarily debate, but a conversation when it comes to like transferring reputation or badges. As you said, you can't transfer a badge, but if I want to create a secondary account, shouldn't I also have the same kind of titles and privileges that I have on my main account? Or what are your thoughts on that? Or are you working on something in the future when it comes to that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of development that still needs to be done around identities in Web3. Typically your identity is connected to an account, but of course you can have multiple identities and multiple accounts. Most people will have their ENS as their sort of primary, outward facing identity. So we imagine that most people will collect badges that they want to be part of their primary outward facing identity on that same account. If you want to have a secondary account that has, a different identity that uses a different context, then of course that's also possible. You can collect badges in multiple places. We are looking into things like ZK technology to make it possible for you to, hide certain badges or make them private. But that's a little bit down the line. We're still very much early on. This is an entirely new concept. We're still building out the foundations. And I do think that there's a lot still to come in just identity and Web3 in general. And there's a lot of great people building in the space.
For sure. If we take a step back for a new user, what would be the process from A to Z? Like, what would be the different steps? Go on the website if I want to create a badge, or if I'm an organization, what would be the different steps?
Yeah. So let's imagine you're part of an organization. Perhaps you are the team lead of the translation guild, let's say, of a big DAO. So what you could do is you could join Otterspace. You could create your sub DAO entity on Otterspace, so the translation guild. You can then later, by the way, connect that to a main DAO. So we have a construct of main DAOs and sub DAOs. So let's say you set up your what you do in that process is you actually mint a token that we call a RAF token, which is a regular ERC 721, and that's the token that represents your sub DAO. Once you have that, you can create a badge in just a couple steps. So it's very simple. A badge follows the ERC 721 metadata schema. So you upload an image, you provide a name, you can set an expiry date if you want, which is the date that the badge itself expires. So if you're using it for, let's say, a season participation badge, and the season ends at the end of January, then you can set all those badges to expire at the end of January. So you set your expiry and then you register the badge on chain, and then your badge is created, or your badge spec as we call it. So that's the blueprint for the badges. And then you would allow list members of your community. So let's say you create the Translation Guild team member badge. And then you have 5 team members, you add their wallet addresses to the allow list, and they can then come in and claim their badge. So we have consent on both sides, which we think is really important for soul-bound tokens. So, the person creating the badge has to consent to people receiving it. Of course, otherwise, if anyone could receive a badge, then it doesn't have any meaning. And then the people claiming also have to provide their consent. So you can't just create a badge and airdrop it to, 1,000 wallets. They need to then come and claim it.
Do you have like one or two use cases that you could mention, projects that are currently using Otterspace?
Yeah, that's a great question, because as we already talked about earlier, badges can be used for so many things. So it can be a little bit dizzying to think about all the different things you can use it for. So we have 4 use cases that we see emerging. So the first one is using badges to structure your community through roles and levels and sub-DAOs, and then automatically granting permissions based on that. So we are currently running a pilot with Bankless for their level 2 badge and season 6 participation badge. And that replaces their Discord role. So it's bringing on chain the kind of roles and levels that compose the DAO structure already, and bringing those on chain. Creating an on-chain representation of the DAO, and then automatically issuing permissions to those token holders. The second use case is around educational credentials and skills and achievements. So we're working with several Web3 course providers, including Token Engineering Academy, which is issuing Otterspace badges for their Token Engineering Fundamentals course. So after a student completes the course, they receive an Otterspace badge. And what's really interesting about this specific use case with Token Engineering Academy is that they're actually integrated directly into the protocol. So because we have an application and a protocol that's completely open, they're actually using their own interface, and the badges are displayed on the dashboard within the interface, and students can claim the badges from within the interface as well. The next use case that we're seeing emerging a lot is non-financial governance. So as we touched on earlier, Web3 has been hyper-financialized, and especially in DAO governance, we see a lot of whales and big token holders really dominating, the decision making, and other stakeholders that perhaps have more context on a decision, are left out of the conversation. So we're working with Radical, their kind of distribution of influence workstream, to distribute influence to core contributors and basically members of the DAO who are actively contributing but don't have so many tokens. And so we're working on some different ways there to do that alongside their existing governance, so that badges don't have to replace your existing financialized governance, but they can kind of live alongside.
How could you use badges and at the same time use kind of financial ways to govern, like tokens? How would that work? Because in my mind it was more like you either use the badges or you use the tokens. So how would the two work together?
Yeah, so there are two ways to think about it. One is you can have decisions about different things be scoped to different tokens. So you could have, treasury decisions for the main DAO made by holders of the financial token, for example, allocating budgets to different sub-DAOs. And then you could have those sub-DAOs using Snapshot with badges to allow contributors of those sub-DAOs to make decisions within the context of their sub-DAO. So that's one way to just separate, different decision scopes. And then the other way is to actually have a voting strategy that combines both kinds of tokens. So we have a Otterspace snapshot strategy that allows you to combine, an ERC20 token in the same governance rule set as a badge. And what you can do with that is you can say, if someone has a badge, that's equivalent to X number of ERC20 tokens. So you can boost someone's voting power by their badge ownership. And, then the voting strategy calculates, this badge is worth this many tokens, plus the person also has this many of the ERC20 token, and then it calculates the total voting power based on that. And then I'm sure there's loads of other ways that this can become even more complex, but those are the two basic ways to combine governance.
What are you the most excited about actually when it comes to the roadmap of Otterspace and badges in general? Because you mentioned so many different use cases. Obviously, you cannot predict the future, but what do you think is going to work? Do you think all these components are going to work together? Or do you see one use case that is maybe more ready for the space?
It's really hard to pick, because I actually think where you really see the magic is if you actually use all of the use cases within the same organization. Because imagine you set up, roles and the organization structure of your community, and then you can issue governance power to those, based on those roles. And if you also have badges that represent skills and knowledge in a subject area, you can also use those in the context of governance, right? So it kind of like, the more you use badges for different use cases, the more powerful the potential becomes within your community. Because you could say, people with the engineering guild badge can make engineering guild decisions, and if they have certain badges around their token engineering skill set, then maybe that gives them the ability to merge PRs or the ability to vote on certain types of decisions. I think I can't even imagine all the possibilities, but I think the potential is really if you start to combine all of them.
Absolutely. And also you mentioned the focus is governance and DAOs, but it's true, there's identity, there's education, but also like your personal identity. You can do loyalty for brands. There's so many use cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the fourth one that we didn't get to before is one that you just touched on, which is more around like loyalty and sort of engagement rewards. So thinking like kind of loyalty points, like what POAPs are often used for, the fact that you attend an event or the fact that you participated in something, which it might seem like it's a very different thing because those types of badges are less sort of serious, or, that they don't necessarily have governance weight attached to them. But I think they're equally as important because when you start to look at someone's collection of the things they've participated in, then you can maybe, compute the fact that they should earn a loyalty badge or some kind of, second order badge. And then maybe that is attached with, to governance power. So we are seeing that. We're also working with Cabin, who uses Otterspace mainly for that reason, to kind of issue like rewards for participating in Cabin events.
Yeah, I think also one big topic is kind of community royalties. I'm not sure it has been that much explored in the space, but you mentioned Discord earlier, and one of the biggest strengths of Discord is the gamification aspect. You have titles, and if you add the badge component and also the on-chain or blockchain in general, you can start tying rewards to the badges. You can literally reward people for their achievements. So that's also one dynamic, not only when it comes to governments, but even potentially gaming in the future, etc., where the potential is definitely massive there.
Yeah, I think the gaming space is also really interesting. We haven't really touched that area, but I'm curious to see what kind of gets developed in that space too.
You haven't touched on it yet.
So not yet. Yeah, there's enough to do with DAOs. There's definitely so much to build. And yeah, we're really excited.
So what would be the, obviously, you don't have to give the specifics, but the general roadmap for 2023 for Otterspace, has it been defined yet, or you just have Q1 ready, or just general thoughts?
We're working on that at the moment. So as I said, there's so much to build. So the challenge is, like, we definitely see so much demand. We have communities coming to us like every day asking to become part of the beta and use the product. So it's really just about prioritizing. And the main way, or our main priority right now, is to make it as easy as possible to mint and create badges. So we want to make it possible for someone that has very little Web3 experience to have success. And there's definitely a lot to be done there in that UX arena generally.
And wallets, even just wallets, there's a massive.
Yeah, definitely.
That brings me to the next question, which is user experience. Obviously, I'll let any viewer decide for themselves, but personal opinion, even though I shouldn't, is when you go on the website of Otterspace, it's very clear. You're telling a story. It's very simple. What are your thoughts on when it comes to user experiences of making the technology very simple or accessible? Because this is definitely something that a lot of projects in general struggle with, especially when it comes to complicated topics like verifiable credentials or badges.
Yeah, it's really, what I can say first is it's really important to us. So we see ourselves as a very product and UX driven team, and we really place value on that. We also, what was really important to us is to have a brand that's accessible and isn't very sort of masculine and DeFi oriented. I get very frustrated when I open website of a company in Web3 or project and it's all like hard lines and like black and white, and it's a personal opinion, but I personally, as someone that's relatively new to the space, that's not so interested in DeFi or the super technical stuff, I feel a lot more comfortable and welcome in, brighter, lighter, softer spaces. So that was also really important to us in, in creating our kind of brand identity, is really that accessibility. And it's not just about the brand, it's also about who we want to be. We really want to bring the mainstream into Web3, and we think that badges can be a really useful tool for people that are not active in Web3 yet to kind of start to earn these like loyalty points, start to get involved in communities, and so it's really important to us to make the product as accessible as possible.
And you mentioned earlier at the beginning the creator economy. Obviously, that's a whole different massive topic by itself. What are your thoughts when it comes to onboarding creators? And I know creators can be a lot of different things, artists, musicians, etc. First of all, do you think badges are the way to go to onboard these creators? Because there's, first of all, the creators in Web3, but also the creators in Web2. Like, what do you think is the best approach? Because everyone is trying to talk to these creators, but they're very kind of skeptical when it comes to the space.
Yeah, when we were first ideating Otterspace, we had considered, should we build this for creators? And we spoke to a bunch of creators actually, because of course that's my background, and my co-founder Rahul also worked with me at SoundCloud. He built a music blockchain company back in 2017, I think it was. So we have a lot of history in that space. but I think it's too early, honestly. That was my take, is that the technology isn't there yet to really, this, like the UX isn't really there yet to support, mainstream creators and creator communities and fan communities. And I think even though a lot of creators are aware of blockchain, we didn't sense a really strong desire from that group. And so I think that it's just too early. The whole infrastructure that they're using is very Web2 based. And I think once we start seeing more social and creator applications, like, Mirror, for example, have more of a mainstream usage, and we have more creators that are sort of half in Web3, then I think, hopefully by that point, Otterspace badges will have the easiest UX. It will be very, abstracted. People won't need to, even know that they're interacting with blockchain. And then I think there's definitely a lot of potential and, with creators and creator communities to use badges.
I think it's also, as you mentioned earlier, like the evolution of DAOs, like the space needs to mature because the technology is advancing, but people need obviously to understand the technology. Is there any kind of final thoughts, Emily, that you would like to, an article or someone that inspired you lately, or a project that you would like to shout out?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I would just say, like, my parting thoughts would just be, to remain optimistic. I'm an eternal optimist, and I, despite the bear market, despite the, what happened with FTX and the kind of loss in faith that we're seeing in the space, I'm really optimistic. I think that the space needs to become less financialized. We need to focus on real life applications, and especially ones that aren't purely financial. And I think that the space has now been created for that, with the, the downfall of a company like FTX and the kind of ripple effects of that. So I would just say, I think now is a great time to build. It's important that we all support each other, support other builders in the space. We're trying to pay a lot of attention to that, work closely with other DAO tooling projects, and just, keep building, because there's so much to build. And we need to just keep building and stick together. And really optimistic about the future of Web3.
Actually, you just opened the door to, I would say, a final question.
Yeah, sure.
Obviously, the current context. I wanted to hear your thoughts about kind of like artificial intelligence. More specifically, the example that comes to mind is ChatGPT recently, or DALL-E. How do you think this is going to play out? Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball. When it comes to the Web3 space, do you think it's good for the space, or even for Otterspace in general? Do you think that you're going to be able to use this technology in the future, or do you think that in fact it's kind of a scary thing that we don't fully understand?
I guess both. So at Otterspace, we've been very obsessed with DALL-E for a few months now. We have a Discord channel just for DALL-E Otter memes. And we also got really obsessed with ChatGPT when it opened a couple weeks ago. I've been kicked out now because of like too much usage. But on a personal level, I find it really exciting and really terrifying at the same time. It's exciting because I can see how much time it can save me, but it's terrifying that it's a lot better at writing tweets and jokes than I am. That's terrifying. It's the first time that I've really felt what everyone's been saying for years, which is, about like super intelligence and the rise of AI. It's starting to feel real. So I think a lot of people are going through that. But as far as how it connects to Web3, that's actually not something that I've been deeply thinking about. How does this connect to Web3? I think the kind of, parallel technologies that, I think they solve different problems. And I mean, one way that they're useful is that ChatGPT is quite good at writing code and discovering bugs as well. We put it to the test, and it did find a bug in our code pretty much immediately. So I think just generally for software developers and Web3 builders, I think it can be an accelerator. I guess actually, because a lot of Web3 code is, composable and open, I wonder if that means that, ChatGPT will be even more successful at kind of putting together pieces and, building things semi-independently, because a lot of code is open. That just came to mind. I don't know if we should be thinking about that, but that could be interesting. No, we live in an exciting time. That's all I can say.
Those are the perfect closing words. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for being a part of today's episode. And of course, links for Emily and Otterspace will be in the description. As for us, if you want to get more involved in our community, Make sure to follow us on our social platforms. So on Twitter, it's NEWFORUM_NCO. And of course, as usual, have a great day. Take a moment. Don't forget to share, like, or subscribe to the chat. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.